Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the North Central Jersey Association of Realtors Diversity Committee webinar on Section 8. It's a pleasure to have you all with us this afternoon. And this particular webinar is a product of the Diversity Committee. And I'd like to introduce to you our co-chairs, Wendy Worthy and Vanetta Hawkins. And Wendy has some comments she'd like to share with you now. So, Madam Chairperson, the audience is yours.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us on this webinar today. It is the start of celebrating Fair Housing Month. And on behalf of our Diversity Committee, I would like to welcome you. And on behalf of the Diversity Committee, I'd like to welcome you to the webinar. It's Section 8. It's all about Section 8, everything you want to know and more. And let's see. And we have some, we have some other programs that'll be coming up on April 5th. Fairness is the law, and also on April 15th. And we hope that you would join us for that. And I'll throw it back to Gary.
Gary,
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. And our co-chair, Vanetta Hawkins, will be joining us later in the presentation. She has some remarks to share with you as well. At this point, I'd like to take a few moments and just go over with you the format for today's webinar. Obviously, we will do some introductions and allow you to meet our panelists, and then they have a presentation they'd like to go through. And then where time allows, as much time allows, we want to have a question and answer session. We have some questions that have been submitted already, but you can also submit your questions in the Q&A section that you'll see at the lower portion of your screen. Staff is monitoring that, and we'll try to deal with as many questions as we can because we know there's a lot of interest in this particular topic of Section 8. As I mentioned, my name is Gary Large, and I will be serving as the moderator today, and I will be assisted today by our expert panelists. We are privileged to have today Melissa Bellamy, who's the division head of the Middlesex County Public Housing Authority. And we're also very privileged to have Commissioner Paula Alford from the Patterson Housing Authority. And they will be moving forward with the presentation momentarily. You know, it's hard to believe that it's been 53 years since President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1968 that included Title VIII, which has become known today as the Federal Fair Housing Law. And a lot of people don't realize it's been 25 years since the New Jersey State Legislature added a fair housing component to our Law Against Discrimination. So it's just particularly important that we celebrate those two events this month because we've made a lot of progress, but the problem is that there's still so much more that needs to be done. That's why we've partnered with these local housing experts to give you an in-depth presentation on Section 8. Section 8 discrimination complaints are probably one of the most prevalent that the Division of Civil Rights is dealing with. And quite frankly, Section 8 provides benefits to landlords. And there's upcoming policy changes that you should be made aware of. And we need to make sure that we remember our responsibilities under the New Jersey Law Against Discrimination, which includes, as a protected class, source of lawful income. And all of us who have a license are required to adhere to these laws. And failure to adhere to the laws can get us in trouble in the courts and end up with civil fines. But it's also important to know that the Real Estate Commission has a distinct rule, NJAC 11:5-6.4K, that says your failure to do what you're supposed to do in terms of these laws against discrimination can cost you your license. And so that's why we think it's so important for you to pay attention today. And so it's with great pleasure now that I'd like to turn the presentation over to Melissa and she's going to take you through some of the specifics of the Section 8 program.
Thank you, Gary. And Crystal, my video is not working here, which isn't a big issue. So I'll just go ahead with the next slide and we'll start the presentation, and that'll be good. Okay, perfect. All right, that's better. Thank you so much, Crystal. So we can go to the next slide. Well, first back one. Sorry. Thank you. So explain just a little bit briefly about Section 8 and how it works. So Section 8 are really the proper name for it is the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And it's a program that provides rental assistance to primarily families with minor children, elderly and disabled households, so they can afford to rent apartments that are out in the market by having the subsidy that enables them to find any unit in any kind of community, and they're not restricted to just an affordable housing building or public housing. So the process starts with them getting on a waiting list for a voucher. When a voucher becomes available, a public housing authority or an agency known as a PHA issuing them a voucher, them looking for a unit, finding a unit with a landlord. Our office would have an agreement called a housing assistance payment contract between us and the landlord. And then we would determine what portion our program would pay to the landlord and what portion the tenant pays to the landlord to cover what the full rent is. So it's a fairly straightforward process. Next slide, please. Thank you. And this just is a brief explanation of how the three roles of the landlord, tenant, and our public housing authority or agency work together. So you see the between the tenant and the landlord, they have a lease agreement, just as the same as they do with any tenant landlord arrangement. The difference is we're connected to the landlord by that HAP contract, which will lay out the portions we pay and the landlord's responsibility. And we're connected to the tenant in that we provide them a voucher and we expect them to abide by our program regulations. The tenants still pay their security deposit. They're responsible for that and any application fees, any other fees associated with obtaining tenancy. They have to find housing that fits their voucher, that's affordable to them. They're obligated to be a good tenant, like any tenant a landlord would want. So they're supposed to pay their portion of the rent. They have to comply with all the lease agreements, and they have to comply with what we call our family obligations. They have to report income to us. They report changes that happen in their family. For the landlord, there's some paperwork for them to do to kind of get started with a new tenant with us. They have to make sure the unit is in good condition, and then they have to make any needed repairs. We also like our landlords to communicate with us if there's any problems. We view us as a resource for them. So if you have a tenant who isn't paying their rent or is not complying with program regulations, we want the landlord to reach out to us and we can help mediate some of those issues, especially when it's a small landlord who otherwise would have to obtain maybe a services of an attorney to file an eviction or file cease to desist orders. You know, we hope that we can mediate that and head that off before you have to incur those costs. Large apartment complexes, they have attorneys on retainer, someone's late with their rent, they're filing those evictions all the way. So that's a little bit of kind of the relationship and the benefits of having the Public Housing Authority or the PHA as a resource for the landlords. Next slide. How you as realtors can assist is making sure that you're showing rental units to voucher holders and you're showing them all units throughout all the communities that you work in. You're not just steering them to certain locations. You should be knowledgeable about the request for tenancy approval form and help the landlord if needed in that. That's really just a front and back page that'll take about 5 minutes to fill out, but it provides us PHAs with all the information we need about the unit. What's the rent? When is it ready for inspection? What utilities is the tenant paying, and what utilities is the landlord providing? And with that, we can calculate the different portions of the rent, what's the program's paying and what the tenant will pay. So that's the most important thing to get back to a PHA when you're starting a process with a Section 8 tenant. We would like you to try as best you can to not passing on the broker fees to the tenants who are looking for a voucher, or who have a voucher and are looking for a unit. So if possible, if the landlords can cover those fees, you can readily get them tenants and somebody in there. But for many of our tenants, that could be a hardship. For others, it might not be. So I think if you have a tenant who approaches you who has a voucher, you can be straight up and ask them, hey, for many units, you might have to cover X number of costs. Is that something you can do or not? So you would know what units may be for them to look at, or if that's not possible for them. It's not worth anyone's time to waste them looking at a unit if they can't cover a broker fee and that landlord isn't going to waive that. So as best if you can, encourage them to cover them through the landlord and not pass it on to the tenants, but we know that's not always possible. The biggest thing is we want you to help sell the program, because there are a lot of benefits for landlords to rent to voucher holders. Next slide, please. So the biggest benefit is there is guaranteed money from our PHA every month that's going to come to that landlord. And because most of our tenants are usually very low income, that means our program is covering a substantial portion of the rent. For this past year, where a lot of other landlords who have just regular tenants who haven't been paying, we've been making our monthly payments. And for the most part, our tenants have been making our monthly payments, because that's the criteria of the program. So our Section 8 tenants, our Section 8 landlords are in a better position than a lot of landlords who just rented to people in the community. There's that early intervention I spoke about, that we're a resource for you, that you can reach out to us when you're having the problems. And I think every PHA would encourage you to reach out. Even if the landlord's portion is $50 and they're not paying it, you might think, oh, that's not that big of a deal. I'll let it go. No, let us know right away, because we want compliance. If our tenants get evicted, that means they get terminated from our program. So they're highly motivated to avoid eviction. We're also a resource. We have landlords who let us know when they have available units, so we can help them and share that with our tenants who we know are looking for housing. And then the last thing is we require our housing quality standards, or HQS inspections. Some landlords might think, oh, that's a pain, but really it can be an enhancement to you. We do those inspections prior to a tenant moving in. So if we give you a passing inspection, you know that unit's in great shape. Well, if there's an issue 6 months or a year down the line and something is broke, we're going to say, yeah, you might be responsible to fix that. If there's a hole in the wall, but we'll also be able to say, we know that wasn't in there when the tenant moved in. So even if you're making that repair, you can use this documentation to maybe secure those funds through the tenant security deposit when they leave. So there's some benefits for us being able to come in and do those inspections, not only for the tenant's protection, but it's also can help the landlord and document that. Next slide. So some general information. This was just based on some of the questions we had in advance. Our office does the income determination. So we're looking at all the sources of income. There's some allowable deductions and allowances, such as for medical expenses and childcare. So we take care of figuring all that. The tenants really provide us with a lot of documentation, tax returns, bank statements, pay stubs, any kind of benefit letter. So it's our responsibility to collect all that, and then we determine those two portions. In general, tenants are paying 30% of their income, but they can go up to 40% of their income. So if they find a unit that's a little bit above what our standards would pay, they're allowed to contribute more of their income out of pocket to achieve that unit. And one of the questions was, can somebody have zero income? And technically, yes, but that's usually not what we see. Most tenants have income, and if they go to zero income, it's for a short period of time. And so we kind of do that checks. And if we have someone who reports zero income for too long, we start questioning them on a budget. Like, how are you paying for your food and your clothing and your transportation? So that's kind of just some general information about how the program works. Next slide, please. And I'm sorry if I'm talking fast. It's a lot of information I want to cover for you in a short period of time. So hopefully you'll be able to refer back to these slides and kind of remember it or keep it as a refresher. One of the issues we get a lot of times between tenants, landlords, realtors working with it is trying to figure out, is this unit affordable to a tenant or not? So it's just some common terms we use are fair market rents, and they're published by HUD, and they're going to show an average of what the rent is in that particular community. It might be a county, or now HUD even provides them almost to the zip code level. So you can really see it based on what neighborhood you're looking in. Based on those, each PHA determines their payment standards, and they have to be between 90 and 110% of the fair market rents. Most just will match the fair market rents at 100%. Our office tries to go a little bit higher if possible, because we know sometimes if we keep it at 100%, we're preventing our tenants from moving into some of the more desirable communities in our county. So right now we have our payment standards at 108%. So that enables them to rent more units, have access to more units. And with this, since the affordability is based on a percentage of a tenant's income, you know, we say they can go up to 40% of their income. Something that's affordable to one family might not be affordable enough to another. And the fair market rents are published on the HUD website, so you can search for them there, or just Google HUD fair market rents. Next slide. So I just wanted to show you an example. So if we had a 2-bedroom unit in one of our communities in North Brunswick, you're the landlord, you're going to rent it for $1,770. And there's a split between the tenant paying some utilities and the landlord covering some. So our fair market rent for a 2-bedroom is $1,753. But as I said, we have higher payment standards, so we're willing to go up to $1,893. We estimate the utilities to be $167 that tenant is going to be covering. So is this affordable to someone? And if you hit the next advance it, you can see that this amount, when you add the rent plus the utilities, it's a little bit above our payment standard. It's $44 above it. Next slide. So the answer is it's going to really depend on the household. And one more. So we have the Smith household, and they are on TANF. So she only has $332 a month. So she doesn't have the extra out-of-pocket funds to make that unit affordable to her. She's a little short. Next one. But the Jones household, she's working. She has her 10% is $150. So she can cover that little bit extra. What you might do in a situation like that, if we have, Miss Smith, and it's so close, we might ask the landlord, hey, are you willing to lower the first year rent from $1,770 to $1,750? And then that would be affordable to her. They might be willing to do that because they know if someone's rent is that low, Section 8 is paying the largest portion of the rent. We're probably, in her case, covering almost all of the rent or the full rent. So the landlord might be willing to exchange a decrease of $20 for that first year to know that they're getting the guaranteed money from our program. So we'll work through that. Next slide. Just some other general information about the program. The Housing Choice Voucher or Section 8 program is portable. So that tenant can take that voucher that was issued locally and they can share that and port that, move that to anywhere else in the country. So it is a federal program, but each local PHA has their own administrative plan that details how they run the program. So even though there's some standard regulations, we have flexibility, such as in things like determining what bedroom size to give a family. So the state has a program. If they have a single parent with a same-sex child, they're only giving them 1 bedroom. Whereas if our program, we have a single parent with a same-sex child, because they're different generations, we're giving them a 2-bedroom voucher. So each PHA can have some rules locally of how they're going to run their program. Your favorite website for all of this should just be HUD.gov. There's a search feature, and you can put in information on how to file a discrimination complaint. I'm going to put the number there for fair housing. HUD has recently added a really nice landlord resources page. So if you search for HCV landlord, you'll come up to that page on the HUD website. And one of the most important things I can say for both a realtor and a landlord is that we want you to be a partner with us in program integrity. Sometimes Section 8 or the Housing Choice Voucher Program has a bad rap. People think people are abusing it. They're cheating the system. Well, you know, if I have a landlord and they have a tenant in there and they know that tenant has somebody living in there who's not listed on the program, but they're just like, yeah, I don't want to make waves. I don't want to raise issues. No, we want you to. You know, this is program integrity. It's not a good deal to have that in there. Or if you're showing a voucher or showing a unit to someone with a voucher and they have somebody else who's kind of on and indicating that they're living in there, and you know maybe they're not listed on that voucher, you know, that's an issue. The other thing we want to avoid is side deals. Please, for your landlords, don't make any extra deals of like, well, this is as much as Section 8 will allow me to, you know, allow the rent to be, but I'll give you an extra $100 a month and we won't tell Section 8. No, 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 no. You know, that just really affects the program. And that's part of the, you know, the cheating or things that people think happen to Section 8. And they're very few and far between. I have about 670, 80 households on my program right now. And the ones that give me agita are a handful. And the ones that, you know, might be looking to do side deals or smaller issues or get around, you know, that's a very small percentage. Most of it are elderly households, you know, parents who want to live in good neighborhoods with their kids and get them into good schools. You know, disabled people who maybe are only receiving, you know, $800 a month from SSI and couldn't afford to live anywhere in the state on their own. So those are the ones that this program really helps. And that's the majority of the people that you're going to encounter. And one last thing on it that I didn't list as a benefit, but I tend to see is our tenants, when they get in a good unit, they tend to stay. And they like where they are. So you tend to have less turnover. So it can be a good thing if you have a landlord who is willing to, you know, take a chance on a voucher holder, you know, especially if, you know, they're not as strict maybe with some credit checks or things like that. It can be a really long-term benefit. Next slide. And I guess we're open now, Gary, for some Q&A.
And boy, Melissa, there's a lot of different questions that we've been asked, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And Commissioner Alford, if you would open up your microphone and camera, you're not going to avoid being asked some questions either. I want to start out telling everyone, answering, there was a whole series of questions that all come under one particular umbrella, so to speak, and that is this. The New Jersey Law Against Discrimination prohibits discrimination against anyone on the basis of their source of lawful income. So the answer to questions like, do all landlords have to accept Section 8? Absolutely. The answer to a question is, how do we know what landlords accept Section 8? all of them have to. And if they're telling you they don't, they can and should be reported to the Division of Civil Rights because they're violating the law against discrimination. And those of us who are realtors have an ethical responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen as well. So the only exemptions legally acceptable under the law against discrimination in the state of New Jersey have to do with the rental of half of a two-family that's attached side by side or up and down, where one of the units is the primary residence of the owner. And under those circumstances, and only those circumstances, the owner could discriminate on the basis of any of the protected classes except for race and color because of the Supreme Court decision in the Jones versus Mayer case. And if they're renting a room or rooms in their primary residence, their home, once again, that exemption applies. That's it. So everybody else has to accept Section 8 tenants. Now, Melissa, one of the questions that you mentioned, a tenant losing their, and I'm sorry, not Melissa, Wendy, Melissa, my screen's got names popping up all over. I'm getting confused. Melissa, one of the things you mentioned is a Section 8 tenant losing their qualification for not adhering to the program. So we have an interesting question from Elena, who says, what happens if a tenant loses qualifications for HVAC mid-lease because they failed to comply with the program? And as a result, the landlord's no longer getting the voucher. What does the landlord do?
Sure. We usually try to work in conjunction with the landlords. More times than not, it's an issue where the landlords brought a problem to us, and we're working on correcting it, or they're getting evicted, or they're getting violations, whether it's noise, abuse, or something. So there's not a lot of termination from the program for people who aren't doing something that's bothering the landlord. There's very few that ends up with it, because normally the threat of somebody not complying, say they're not giving us paperwork, we're extending them every opportunity to get to that point. So I would say that's a very small percentage of that happening. It's usually more where the landlord's raising issues to us, to it. But we would give the landlord at least like a 30-day notice of termination. We never terminate right away. A tenant's entitled to have a fair hearing where they can, work to get their tenancy reinstated. So sometimes that works for them too. So it's not a terribly frequent occurrence where someone is terminated that a landlord didn't otherwise want out. And there could be an opportunity where we're terminating somebody, say they moved a boyfriend or somebody in there. They're otherwise not really a problem tenant, and maybe they then have the ability to pay on that. So it tends to be a fewer thing, but we always encourage landlords, and it could even be as soon as we're starting maybe that process. If they're late with even a portion of the rent, we might encourage that landlord, go and file for eviction. It tends not to do that. I've had some trouble tenants during this time of COVID, and because of the eviction moratorium, we're not looking to terminate people, because I don't want to do that to a landlord where someone might end up being a squatter. But I think it happens. It doesn't happen terribly frequently. Usually it's somebody, a landlord is just as anxious to get out of their unit because they're not a good tenant.
And Paula, I'm going to pass this one over to you, and I'm actually curious to hear the answer myself. Can Section 8 tenants use the voucher money to purchase a home?
Yes, they have different programs. Well, they have not different programs. They have a program within Section 8 that allow the Section 8 tenant to purchase a home. It's just a process that they have to go through. But if they are interested in that, they should speak with their case manager inside of their housing authority.
Okay. And Melissa, this one is an interesting one too. How are people with criminal records handled? Landlords may not feel comfortable renting to people with a criminal background.
Yeah. Section 8 does screenings to knock out some things that are big issues for them, which would be stuff like Megan's Law, um, certain drug violations for people in the household, and there's usually time limits to do that. Criminal things, type of violence, but really it's up to the landlord to do any kind of regular background screening. So they can do any kind of credit report and background check for a Section 8 tenant, as long as they're doing it for all other tenants that they're seeing. So if they're, and that would be good practice. If I'm a landlord renting out my own house, I'm gonna maybe want to do those type of checks. So there's nothing that prohibits you as a landlord from doing those checks, but you should be applying them equally to a voucher holder and somebody who's just who doesn't have a voucher, who would like to be a tenant with you.
And Paula, I'll jump back to you. If a landlord were to decide to sell their property during the term of a lease to a Section 8 tenant, what happens then?
If the land, could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, if a landlord decides to sell their property that's currently leased by a Section 8 tenant, what happens in terms of the new owner?
That really depends. If the landlord sells the home while a Section 8 tenant is in it, I believe they have to give them the same notice as they would any other tenant. That would give that tenant the right then to seek out a new place for new housing. Other than that, there's no other obligation for the landlord. Like they can't sell the house because they have a Section 8 tenant there that hasn't found an apartment. They just have to give them the appropriate notice so that they are on their end able to then seek out new housing.
Okay. And Paul, while I'm on your side of the screen, talk to the audience about resources. Where do they go for help? Where would realtors go for help working with Section 8 tenants?
I would go directly. I would go to the actual housing authority. They have a load of information and education, as they are required to be certified by HUD in a lot of different areas. So they are going to be a very, very knowledgeable about just different things about Section 8 that the realtor probably wouldn't know, because that's just not their niche. But the housing authorities in those cities and counties where these realtors are working, they are most knowledgeable because they are working hand in hand with HUD.
And Melissa, this question I'll direct to you. Where do the realtors go to report someone that isn't accepting Section 8? And even after you explain that that's not acceptable, they still refuse. Where would you send them?
You can go to the HUD website. They have the Fair Housing Equal Opportunity Office. You can file a complaint right online. It's one of their links on their page. There's also a 1-800 number, an 887 number you can call and report that. A lot of times a tenant might not report it, so it'd be really great if the realtor could. The tenant is focusing on finding housing, so they're not gonna. That's their immediate concern. But it's a good thing to to make that known. And I notice even some people notice, sometimes landlords will try to do that by putting up barriers just to the Section 8 tenants, a high credit score where somebody else they'd be willing to take.
And I'm just going to share with the audience a little personal aside. I had to attend my continuing education webinar with the New Jersey Real Estate Commission to maintain my instructor's license back on December 3rd. And one of the guest speakers the commission brought into the meeting was a representative from the Division of Civil Rights. And he was explaining to us how aggressively the New Jersey Division of Civil Rights is now pursuing Section 8 discrimination violations. He reported that they've issued over 100 consent orders, meaning that a landlord was fined and had to agree to stop doing what he was doing. He also mentioned that they had entered into formal agreements with Zillow and a company whose name I can't remember that does post rentals online. And they both signed an agreement with the state of New Jersey to no longer accept advertising that says no Section 8. So for whatever reason, the New Jersey Division of Civil Rights is focused on this much more so than they have been in the past. So all of us need to be very, very careful and make sure we're fulfilling our responsibilities. Let's see, Melissa, if you had to, in 30 seconds or so, how can we better educate landlords to correct the stigma that's associated with Section 8?
And the best thing is to tell some success stories. I have a different program I work with that's with vouchers that are given to people who were formerly homeless or formerly homeless, and getting them in. And we've had some small private landlords who rent properties, and they willingly work with us. They tell great success stories of, hey, I took a chance on this, on this person who was homeless. And that would be, for somebody who has stigmas attached to vouchers, it'd be the last person they'd probably want to rent to. And we have this one landlord, and they say, I'm saying it, sorry to say it to realtors, but he never has to market his units because he calls the local social service agency, the nonprofit at Catholic Charities that, has these type of vouchers sometimes available, and our rental assistance, and he never has a vacancy because anytime he can come to it. So I think the landlords who are smart and can see the benefits of it. And, here's the deal. If you're a good landlord, you can be a good landlord with a Section 8 tenant. If you're a bad landlord and let any tenant walk all over you and don't do the proper background checks and don't do all those things that make a good landlord, then the average person is going to take advantage of you too. I just think the enhancement of having another agency like a PHA to be able to go to and work together on those few people who might be a problem. But who doesn't want to get a good portion of their rent guaranteed every month by a program, and to know that. So I think it's, if you get landlords to maybe tell some of the success stories, a landlord might believe another landlord better. It helps with you as a realtor too, telling a good story. If you can tell somebody like, hey, I've placed somebody in, and they've been there now for 5 years, haven't had a problem. That goes a long way.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm going to clarify something I said earlier for my good friend Doug Ramos, who's in the audience. Hello, Doug. And Doug is asking me to mention the exemptions that I explained to you that are available under the New Jersey Law Against Discrimination, where the homeowner who is living in one half of a two-family or is renting rooms in their primary residence. In both those cases, you're not allowed, if you're going to use the exemption as the landlord, to use the services of a realtor. So, for example, the two-family owner who lives in one half could not list the other half with a realtor if they intended to use that exemption. And so, Doug, thanks for clarifying that. And Paula, here's one for you. Discrimination can be dicey, and I'm wondering, are you saying that a landlord has to accept a Section 8 tenant if there's a more qualified applicant?
Has to. I think the landlord has the right to choose, as like Melissa said, as long as the process is fair across the board. So as long as the same application processes, the same credit check processes are being applied to a Section 8 tenant as well as a market rate tenant, and they choose to go with the market rate tenant, they have the right to do that if they felt that that person was better qualified or better fit for their property.
And Melissa, I know we get this question all the time when we do our fair housing workshops. What happens if Section 8 does an inspection of the rental and requires repairs, but the landlord doesn't have the financial resources to do those repairs? Can they then reject the Section 8 tenant?
Well, yeah, we're going to reject it then, because if a landlord's not willing to make the repairs that are needed for our tenant to move in, so then we're not going to complete the deal. So it's, that's not I wouldn't consider that them not being willing to rent to a tenant. But what we look for in our housing quality standards, because I saw it was a question, so I'll just kind of address it, is really basic, decent, safe, and sanitary. We're looking that all the major systems are working. It's the unit's been freshly painted. There's not, not holes in the walls. The windows work. There's, proper ventilation in the, in the bathrooms. There's the GFI outlets in the kitchen and the bathrooms. So usually the things that they find aren't terribly major. Nobody's going to say, that floor looks old, you need to pull it up and put in a new one. But we can't force a landlord to comply if they're not gonna, if they're not gonna fix the unit. We won't lease up with that person. Or if it's an existing tenant and there's some issues that a landlord doesn't want to repair, we give them a time frame to do it, and we give them notice. We would start abatement, which means we would eventually stop paying them. And then at that same time, we might be encouraging the tenant to start finding a new place. If you get an unwilling landlord, but those tend to be very few and far between. What we're looking for would be the same thing that you would want to live for and look in, as far as a place to live. It's in good condition. And especially we're really concerned about the safety things. When you're putting, elderly senior families in there, my inspector talks about, he always makes sure he looks at the dryer vent. If there's a washer and dryer in the unit and it's the metal drying vent and they didn't try to get away with the cheap plastic one that could start a fire. That's a difference of a handful of dollars, but it could save, it could save a life. So those are the type of things we're looking for, not looking for landlords to, make these big wholesale improvements.
Melissa, well, I'll give this one to Paul since I was just done picking on Melissa. Paula, what is considered lawful income in terms of Section 8?
There's, lawful income is income. There's no, really, what is unlawful income? All income is lawful income, not all income, but lawful income, your job, your wages, your means of making a living. As long as we're not talking about anything that would be considered illegal under the law, we'd be talking about lawful income.
And a question, Melissa, technical, I guess, or logistical. What comes first, the inspection of the property or the tenant signing the lease?
It should be that the inspection should happen first. So the process should be the landlord, if they want to engage with this tenant, they send us that they give us that request for tenancy approval form laying out what's the rent, what's the utilities, when it's ready for inspection. We're going to take that. We're going to try to quickly determine if this unit fits it at that rent. So we'll get back to that landlord right away and say, hey, this will work or this won't work, or would you adjust the rent or not? Then when we know it fits the person, the household, then we'll look to get the inspection scheduled. And the inspector would reach out to the landlord directly and coordinate a mutually agreeable time. It's only then that we encourage the tenant to sign that lease, because it could, we don't want them to bind themselves to a unit that we're not able to provide the Section 8 assistance for. So that's usually the order. We tell them to do that. And then at that same time, we'll do our HAP contract with that tenant. With that landlord.
And Paul, I'm hitchhiking on a question you dealt with before, but just from the other side of the coin. If someone sells the home that they have a Section 8 tenant in, and the new owner wants to keep the tenant, is there a new inspection or application, or how's that work?
There really should be a rerun anytime a new tenant, and this goes for Section 8 and beyond. Anytime a new tenant is entering into a unit, there should always be a reinspection, because there needs to be a certificate filed that an inspection was done for that tenant.
But in this case, the owner of the property is that originally put the Section 8 tenant in has sold the home, and the new owner would like to keep the Section 8 tenant. Do they have to go through any procedural process with you?
That I would have to double check with the housing authority, but I would presume that they probably would need a new inspection, but I would have to check with the housing. I would check with the housing authority just to make sure.
And Melissa, I'm going to throw this one over to you. Can you explain more about the limitations around the number of bedrooms assigned to a voucher? For example, if the voucher is for 3 bedrooms, but rents in the area are too high, and the Section 8 tenant starts to look at 2 bedrooms plus extra space in the form of a den or office, how does that work?
Well, really, it's the program requires us to consider whatever the bedroom unit is. That's the maximum payment standard we have. So if I'm a voucher holder with a 3-bedroom, but I can't find a 3-bedroom that works to me, I can take a 2-bedroom as long as it wouldn't cause overcrowding. Um, but the payment standard that applies is a 2-bedroom payment standard because that's all that that unit is. So usually that's not happening as much because then, you know, if my 3-bedroom payment standard is like 2,100, my 2-bedroom is 1,893. So if somebody is finding, you know, can't find that 3-bedroom unit, they find a 2-bedroom unit, well, I have to apply that 1,893 amount, not the 2,100 amount. So they sometimes might do it because they're in a pinch to find it. You know, 3 bedrooms aren't as plentiful as 2 bedrooms, but that payment standard of a 2-bedroom is what applies. Sometimes we see tenants trying to do another thing. They might only have a 2-bedroom voucher, but they try to find an affordable housing property where the 2-bedroom payment standard would work with a 3-bedroom. So the voucher and the actual unit don't always have to match. More often than not, they do, but it can be a slightly higher unit as long as it doesn't exceed that payment standard. But we as the PHA are never going to pay more than what's on the voucher or what's on the bedroom size, whatever is the lesser amount.
And a follow-up that's kind of in the same vein, is there a max income to qualify for a voucher on the part of the Section 8 tenant?
There's not, there is, yeah, there's max incomes at the time they apply for the program. There's some different targeting levels and they have to be below it. But then once they're on the program, they stay on the program up until the point they would be contributing 100% of their rent. So once they get to where they're paying 100%, they're allowed to stay on the program for 6 months as far as just being on the program, even if we're not contributing to the landlord in case their situation changes. But in essence, they graduate out of the program based on their income.
And my dear friend, Diana Bustamante, hello, Diana, asked this question, and I'm going to clarify it one more time. She said that her understanding is that once the landlord hires a real estate agent, even if they live in the other side of the 2-family house, they're no longer allowed to use the exemption available under the Law Against Discrimination to discriminate on the basis of any protected class. And that is absolutely correct, Diana. They cannot use the services of the realtor to rent the other half of the 2-family and use the exemption. It's one or the other. And Paula, I think I'm going to let you kind of wrap us up with this one because we're getting to the point where I want to bring our co-chair Vanetta in to make some remarks to our audience. So the question I'll leave you with is, what is the first step for a landlord to become part of the Section 8 program? What would they do first?
As a landlord that wants to become a part of the Section 8 program, one of the first steps that they should take is educating themselves with the standards that HUD is going to expect from them and what they're going to expect of that unit from them. And making sure that they are even ready to take that step. As Melissa had mentioned about the different levels of inspection that they're going to have to go through and the different things that they're going to be expected to provide as a landlord. So one of the first steps is just I would go to the HUD website, see what those expectations are and see if I meet them. And if it's something that I want to move forward with, then I would take the necessary steps as provided by HUD into doing that.
Well, I want to thank Paula. I want to thank Melissa for their time, their expertise, and Melissa for that wonderful presentation. I want to emphasize a couple things that came up during the presentation. Unfortunately, this particular program does not qualify for CE credit. It's for informational purposes only. And yes, you will be getting copies of the slide, and I believe that the session has been recorded, so it may be made available at future points for those people who want to watch it at their leisure. But now I'm going to ask Crystal to bring our slides back up, and I'm going to ask our co-chair, Vanetta Hawkins of the NCJAR Cultural Diversity Committee, to come on board and talk to you about some of the fair housing resources and upcoming programs going on at NCJAR.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, perfect. Everyone, this was absolutely amazing. I just want to say thank you. You know, to get over 500 people registered and to have, you know, over 280 people join the session with the massive amount of questions that you're asked. We are, you know, this was just an ultimate success, and we might even have to do another one because there was just such a huge array of questions. But you know, definitely, you know, thank you for all your engagement. We truly appreciate everything that you all, definitely for supporting our the diversity committee. Now, resources. We're sending out this presentation, so you will have everything, the whole entire presentation. The hyperlinks are available, so you will be able to utilize the hyperlinks when you open up the presentation to see NAR Fair Housing, the housing authorities, HUD.gov. So all of these things will be available to you to be able to click and utilize those tools. Crystal? Okay, so upcoming fair housing events. We have a lot happening with NCJAR and with the diversity committee. So let's talk about that. What's next? So these classes right here that you see on the screen, they are for your 1 hour fair housing CE credits. So please be sure to go to NCJAR.com and sign up for one of the classes so that you can get in and get your CE credits, the 1 hour CE credits. So April 6th, April 9th, several classes for you to be able to make it to. So fairness, it's the law. We actually, the YPN, NCJAR YPN network, and the Diversity and Cultural Committee, we are hosting a joint event on Monday, on the 5th, so that you can actually get 3 CE credits for the Fairness, It's the Law session. So please be sure, you know, I don't even know if it was almost, I think, booked. I don't know if Crystal was able to expand more people to be able to join, but definitely please attend that one as well and get those 3 credits for the Fairness, It's the Law session. Oh, whoop. Okay, perfect. So our committee, we are hosting another event on April 15th, and this one is around bridging the gap now with intentional inclusion. And we have our guest speaker, Marky Lemons-Rayel, and she will be hosting this session on Thursday, April 15th from 10 to 11. We will be advertising. You can go right to NCJAR.com and start registering for that session that we're going to have, but it's definitely going to, you know, help you guys to understand how intentionality can actually end up to positive results. So please join us with that seminar that we'll be hosting on the 15th of this month. Oh, okay. Thank you for attention. Okay, here are all of our contacts. So please reach out to Gary, to Wendy, my co-chair, myself, Melissa Bellamy from the Middlesex County Housing Authority, and Paula Alford from the Patterson, our Patterson Commissioner. Please feel free to take all their emails, connect with them if you have any questions. And I think the most important thing was if you're working with that landlord or you're working with that tenant, you want to be connected to the housing authority in that area. So feel free to connect with Paula, connect with Melissa. They'll be able to help guide you to whatever market that you're in, but you can go online and also find those same resources.
And I want to say thank you so very, very much to Chairperson Wendy and Chairperson Vanetta for putting together this program today. What a great job on behalf of the committee. I want to recognize two very special people, our staff member, Crystal Berger, who was running the slides for us, and our Chief Operating Officer, Michelle Epstein-Perrone, who was handling chat and Q&A, as well as Fiorella Diaz from the Housing Authority, who was in there handling Q&A with us as well. We can't do these things without all that kind of background support, and we are so grateful for having those good folks working with us today. So again, on behalf of the panelists, Melissa and Paula, the Diversity Committee, thank you for attending. And this event was recorded, and all of the recording and supporting material will be posted as soon as we can possibly get it up on our site for you. So have a great day. Be well. Stay safe out there.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.